Tav Pei Aleph Amud Beis will begin Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, the Mishnah towards the bottom. Zok the Mishnah, Noisen Ada Mo Lechanvani Ulunachtam. A person can give a silver coin to a grocer or baker. Kedei Sheyizake Loi Eruv. He gives that money to them so that he should now be Masechet for them to the Eruv. Meaning, so the idea is he's paying the butcher, he's paying the baker, that when the people come to collect the food for the shituf, for the Eruv or the shituf, so that the baker should give some of the food to them, he should give the bread to them on behalf of this person who gave him the money. Meaning, so the mechanics would seem to be working, that the person paid the baker, therefore the bread belongs to him, and belongs to him, he purchases. So when they come collecting for the shituf, the baker gives the bread, it's really the person who contributed, who gave the money, it's his bread, so therefore the bread is being given on behalf of that person, so therefore it's valid. That's Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. The Chum say, no, it's not valid. It cannot be valid. Why? Because we know that to be able to be to make a kinyan, to say that you acquired the item, is a requirement that there has to be a meshicha. You have to physically bring it into your possession. You have to draw it. Money is not sufficient to acquire an item. So machlekes Rav Yochanan Rish Lakish is a dvar ter, or is it midrabanan? But al kol panim, in order to acquire the item, you have to do meshicha. You have to take possession of it. So the Chomim said this is not valid because the person who gave the money, yes, he gave the money, but he didn't acquire the bread. So when the baker is giving the bread to the people who are collecting the shituf, it's not the bread that belongs to the person who gave the money. It doesn't belong to him. He doesn't own it yet. So the baker is really not giving that person's bread. He's giving his own bread. And therefore, that person who gave the money has not contributed to the shituf. Now, yes, it's true that if the baker had intended to give bread on behalf of somebody, he could. He could give his own bread on behalf of somebody. But, now there's a slight variation in the way Rashi and Taisus are learning it, but over here, either the pshat is that the baker, the way Rashi is learning, is not intending to give his own bread to the shituf. He's intending to give the bread of the purchaser to the shituf, and the purchaser doesn't own the bread. Well, the way Taisus is learning it is that the person who gave the money, the contributor, he's not intending to have a free ride. He's not intending to have it given for him. He's intending to be mishtatev with the movi, with his own bread. And in any event, this bread does not belong to him. And therefore, it's not valid. But even though the Chum say that in this case it's not valid, they agree that for other people that the Eruv is an Eruv. As the Gemara will explain, other people means someone who is doesn't sell, is not a baker or a butcher, he doesn't sell things. So, meaning when it's given to that person, the understanding is it's given that this person should be the shaliach for him. If it's a shaliach for him, if he's doing it as shlichus, that means that the item doesn't have to be owned by the contributor. So it is therefore he's paying him the money to take care of this for him, but not necessarily that the food should be his own, that he acquired the food and it should be his own food. Therefore, it works mitam shlichus and it's valid. Now, you can only make an eruv for a person by midas, if he does it willingly. Therefore, since you can only do it if he gives you instructions to do it, therefore, in the case of the butcher, the baker, there was no instructions to give to be a shaliach. It's not implicit either that he's a shaliach. Therefore, the Chacham say it's not valid. But if that's the case, when is this true? So when do the Chachamim say that it's not valid? That's only by Tchumim, because by a Tchum it's not necessarily a benefit. A person might want to go a paimama with this direction, or he might want to go in that direction. To make a tchum, unless the person was appointed as a shaliach, unless we know clearly that it is the will, the ratzon of the mishaleach, you can't do it without prior consent, because we don't know that it's a benefit. And the rule is, you can only be mezakeh a person, you can be mezakeh a person with something which is a benefit, a clear benefit to him, that you can do midaita shalem midaita. But if something is not a clear benefit, a chayiv, you can only do it for a person if he has given you instructions. So tchumim, it's not clear cut that it's a schus, that it's a benefit. Maybe he wants the tchum to be in another direction. So therefore it has to be midaita. So therefore there is no implicit shlichus by the baker, and he cannot do it on behalf of the nishalei, the person who gave him the coin, rather, who gave him the mo. It's deemed to be this case to be the case that he's buying the bread and he wants to use it with his own bread, but he doesn't own the bread, and there's no deemed shlichus. So therefore, by erev tchum, it's not valid. But by Amud Yomi Masechet something which is a clear-cut benefit, one can do for a person even without his knowledge, even the shlei b'fanav, even if he's not there in his absence. But something which is not a clear-cut benefit might be a chayiv. It might not be a benefit for him. It has to be midaita. He has to know about it. It has to be with his consent. So therefore, in summary, the Chachamim hold that in the case where it's someone who sells, that's his occupation, if the money is given to him, the understanding is the money is being given to him, that the person who gave the money is to buy his product, to buy the item that he's selling, and to use that item, that item should be used for the shituf, because he wants to use his own item for the shituf. Or that the baker, the butcher, wants this person, is agreeable that this person should use the person's item, his own item, for the shituf. And therefore the Chum hold, since the person has not acquired the bread, he only gave the money, and most are not kindness, the shituf is not valid because it's not his own bread. But when is that so? That is by Tchumim, which could be a chayiv, but by Ruach Hatzeres, which is a clear-cut benefit. A person has a clear benefit by being in the chaser, it's only positive. It enables him to carry. There's no negative. Then even if there is no ownership of the item, but the baker can be a shaliach, can be mezakeh, and he can be mezakeh to the person on his behalf. He can do it on his behalf. So therefore we say that by the baker, it's only by Ruach Hatzeres, not by Tchumim. But if it's not a professional, if it's not someone who sells regularly, we would interpret the giving of the money. If it's to a regular balabais, we would interpret the giving of the money, not that he's acquiring something, because this balabais doesn't sell items normally. We would interpret the giving of the money as being mamanim as a shaliach. Well, if he's appointing him as a shaliach, it's valid both by Eruv Hatzeres or by Tchumim also, because he was appointed as a shaliach. Drinking more of my time with Rabbi Eliezer, well, the reasoning for the Chum seems to be clear-cut. But what's the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer? Why should it be valid if he gave the money to the baker? They made it just like the case of 4 times in a year. What is that case? The Mishnah says, "Desnan bedal prakim elu mashchiten esatabach bal karchim." These 4 times of the year, that is Shmini Atzeres, Erev Pesach, Erev Shavuos, Erev Rosh Hashanah, where people eat a lot of meat, and therefore it's something that people is in high demand, and it's very needed. So we say on those 4 times, the Chacham made a takana that you can force the butcher to sell even if he doesn't want to. And afilu ashor shav elav dinar, ve'en lekeach el dinar echad, even if it's a shore that's worth 1,000 dinar, and this purchaser only wants to buy a dinar's worth of meat. Kaifen isolishche, we force the seller, we force the butcher to shecht it for him. This is a time where meat is needed and it's in high demand, and even if this particular purchaser is only buying a small amount, but presumably there will be other purchasers to take up the slack. We force the butcher to sell it, to shecht it. And therefore, if the animal dies, if it dies before it's shechted, and now it's a loss, it's now an available, you can't eat the meat. But we say the purchaser, it's already his. He paid for it, and it's his animal that died. And therefore he suffers the loss. Why should you say Mesel Lekeach? What do you mean he owns it? He only paid money. He didn't do a Mashiach. He didn't bring it to him. And to be clean of something, metaltalin, you have to do Mashiach. We're talking in a case where he did Mashiach. Gemara says, how can you say that? The Sefer says, but that's only on these Dalit Prakim, these 4 times of the year. But on regular time, during the regular course of the year, we don't say that. And therefore, if the animal died before the Shechita, we say it's the Meicher, the butcher's animal that died. He suffers a loss. Well, if you're telling me the cases where there's a Mashiach, if the Lekeach already did a Mashiach, it belongs to the Lekeach. Why should the Meicher suffer the loss? So obviously the case cannot be talking where there was a Mashiach. Well, if there's no Mashiach, then why during the Dalit Prakim B'Shana, why at that time do you say that if it dies, the purchaser suffers the loss? If it's not his, if there's no Mashiach, you're talking there was no Mashiach. What we're talking over here is that he transferred the ownership to him al yedei acher. The animal, the butcher gave someone else the animal and told him to be masakeh, to accept it on behalf of the meicher, of the lekeach rather. The lekeach did not appoint, the purchaser did not appoint this person. The butcher unilaterally was mazakeh de'acher. He appointed a person to accept it, to receive ownership on behalf of the purchaser, and he's a shaliach, and therefore he acquired the ownership for the purchaser, and therefore if the animal dies, even before the purchaser received it, but it's already his because the shaliach, he accepted ownership on his behalf. So therefore, that's why we say that. So how does this work? So now, if that's the case, what's the difference between these 4 times and the rest of the year? In the Dalit Prakim, that it's a schus over there, we know that purchaser certainly wants the meat. Everybody wants meat at that time, so it's definitely unequivocally a schus. Therefore, you can be mezakeh, shaloi b'fanav, you can be mezakeh on his behalf, and he acquired it. But the rest of the year, it's not clear cut that he wants the meat over there. It's not such a clear cut issue. Those 4 times of the year, he definitely wants the meat. He wants the purchase to go ahead. Therefore, it's a schus. But the rest of the year, it's not, and therefore you cannot unilaterally appoint a shliach. You can't be mamana shliach and without the consent of the purchaser. So therefore he hasn't acquired it, and therefore he doesn't suffer the loss. That's one approach. Rav Ilam, Rav Yochanan, a different approach is since everybody needs meat at that time and it's a mitzvah to have it, and they had to facilitate the transactions and the high demand and the high volume, the Chamim said that on those 4 times of the year we will not impose our requirement for Mashiach. Now this is going according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that min ha'Torah mois or kindness. Just by paying the money you acquire the item. The Chachamim added on a requirement for Mashiach. They added on a requirement for Mashiach. So he says that requirement is, generally speaking, But these 4 times of the year, they did not impose that requirement. Therefore, once he paid the money, he already acquired it. If the animal dies before Shechita, he suffers the loss. During the rest of the year, there's a requirement for Mashiach. So just because he paid the money, he did not yet acquire it. If it died before he took possession, then the seller suffers the loss. Money acquires the possession. Why did the Chachamim say that Mashiach is required? It's because we're afraid if a person pays the money and he acquired it before taking possession, so maybe the seller has it in his warehouse, maybe he has it in his attic. So Reuven comes and he pays money to Shimon the seller. Now, if you say that Reuven acquired it before taking possession, well, maybe it's in his warehouse, maybe there'll be a fire in the warehouse, and then Shimon won't exert himself to try to save it because it's not his anyway. He got paid, and why should he exert himself and put himself in danger in a certain way, etc.? So we're afraid that he'll say that he won't care, he won't exert himself to save it, and that Reuven will suffer the loss. Therefore we said that no, Reuven does not acquire ownership until he takes physical possession. Therefore, even though he paid, it's still in Shimon's possession, and Shimon will exert himself to save it because he's the one that will suffer the loss. Now the Mishnah said that by other people who are not the nachtum, who are not the baker or the butcher, that they are moida that it is valid for the eruv, for the shituf. Man ashar kol adam, who is it referring to? Amar Rav balabais. It's referring to a balabais who doesn't sell things regularly. He's not selling things. He's just, the person goes to his neighbor, he gives him some money, and that when they collect for the shituf, that he should do it for him, he should contribute it. V'chein amar Shmuel balabayis. The Amar Shmuel says, Lo yishon el nachtem. This, that the Chum say it's not valid, is only by the nachtem. Aval abayis kaina. But the bayis would be kaina, as we said before, because the nachtem, since he sells, the money is viewed, it's deemed as a purchase. That the person is giving the money because he wants to acquire this item, he wants to acquire the bread, and he wants his bread to be used for the shituf. But if you give it to a neighbor, a balabayas, he doesn't sell things. If you're giving the money, we view it as he's giving the money to be his shaliach to effect the shituf, to be mishtat of him with the shituf. And therefore, the shlichus will help. Now, even though the Chacham said that it doesn't help by the case of the nachtum, that's where he gave him money. Aval kli kaina. But if he gave him a kli, a utensil, then it would be kaina. Then it would be valid. Why is it valid? Because what are the mechanics of a kli? A kli is when you give a kli to somebody, and for something in return, that's chalipin. That's chalipin. They weren't goyzer. The Chum did not require Mashiach. That chalipin is valid, and it's an exchange. Once you give one item, you give the kli, you're kinda the other item return, even before making a mashiach, before it comes into your possession. Why is that so? As Rashi explains, because a kli is usually not worth the full value of the item. You're paying money usually for the full item value of the item. So here by the kli, it's not that way. So therefore, the seller has not received his full payment. Since he has not been fully paid, he will exert himself to try to save the item, so we don't have that gzera of Shema Nisfu Chitech Ba'aliyah. And Shmuel also said that's only when he said that Zochli, Ava Amar Eruvin Shaliach Shel V'Kana. So even when he gave the baker the money and he said, and we said the Chum say it's not valid, that's when he said Zachli. That implies that he wants to buy it and he wants his item to be used for the sheet. But when it says Zachli, the lashon of Zacha is not mashma, doesn't imply he's buying it. It implies Zacha, make this chus for me, that it implies shlichus, to be a shaliach for me. So there, in that case, there's no difference between the balabayas and between the nachtem, that it works mitam shlichus. Amar Rav Yehuda was machalek between a tchumim and a rivach hatzeres. And he said the rivach hatzeres is always considered schus, and therefore you can do it mishalem yidaita, but not by tchumim. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. So that's the halacha. And not only in this place, not only here, but everywhere when the Mishnah mentions Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is kemaisa, and we follow that. That is the halacha. Rabbi Yehuda, Amra Shmuel. Did Shmuel say that the halacha of Rabbi Yehuda everywhere in Eruvin, afil b'movish and nitl kareisu v'lachayev? Even if you have a movie that during the Shabbos the malachi or the curve was removed, and he says that you can continue carrying over there, that it's kosher for the rest of the Shabbos. Is halacha like Rabbi Yehuda there as well? Amraleh, he said no. Be'eruvin amati lach, v'lo b'mechitzas. Only legabi eruv, making an eruv, but not legabi mechitzas. Over there we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel says the halacha is like Yehuda. That implies that there's a machlokes. That there's a mecham say no, there is no chilik between eruve chatzeres tchumen, between shituf mevuos, and between eruve chatzeres and between tchumen. That even by eruve chatzeres and by shituf mevuos, the halacha would be the same as by tchumen. I've Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Kol Malkim Amar Rabbi Yehuda a Maseva Bameh b'Mishnasenu Ena Lo Farish Divrei Chachamim. He says when we say that lashon of Bameh, like we have in our Mishnah, the Rabbi Yehuda says Bameh Dvar Mamurim, he's not arguing, he's explaining the Chachamim. So Shmuel is saying we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, which implies that the Chum argue with him. He said that lashon is Bameh is to explain. There is no machlekes. More of a light pligi. Do they not argue? We learned in the previous mission if there were more residents that were added on to the Mavoi, then Moisef Umazake, you have to add food corresponding to the new residents, and Umazake, Moisef Umazake, and Vitzarach Loidia, and you have to inform them. Now, even though you're adding your own food, you still have to inform them. So you see that you cannot do it shaloi midaitam. So you see over here that even though we're talking about a shita mevuos, we see that the Mishnah says tzorach lohidia, which is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The more answers and says no, that's not a raya, because over there, even in that case, Rabbi Yehuda would be moida because hasim b'chatzer shebein shnei mevuos. That's talking about a chatzer that's between shnei mevuos, between two mevuos, and therefore, it's not clear whether the members of the chatzer want to join this mavoi or that mavoi. So it's not a clear-cut schus for them. So you cannot do it unilaterally. You cannot do it without their consent. But in a case where the chatzer opens only to one mavoi, over there, it's a clear-cut benefit, so you can do it without their consent. So over there, in that case over there, even Rabbi Yehuda would be moida that you have to have their consent. So it's not a raya that they're arguing that it's a machlokes. Gemara says, I'll preview from the following that they do argue. He said, Rav Shizra said in the Rav Chisda, that shows you, he says, we see from this Mishnah that they do argue. So he holds that there is a machlokes. Hello, the Gemara said, you're asking me a kash from one man to the other. You're asking from Yeshua ben Levi onto Shmuel, Mar Savar Pligi, or Mar Savar Light Pligi. Shmuel holds that they argue. Shmuel holds that they argue, and that's why it was necessary for him to say to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Umar Salvar, Yeshua ben Levi says that they don't argue, and therefore you don't have to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda because there's no argument. He's only explaining the Divrei Chachamim.